And the little spinning thing is done spinning, Jose. So we are now live. Good morning, Jose. How are you today?
Hey, Brian, good morning. How are you doing?
Good, good. Good morning, everybody. On a chilly day here in Colorado. We were just talking about the weather here before we went live. It is, let's see, my little thermometer says it's 16 degrees in Colorado. Hopefully, our friends in Texas are getting a break in the weather and things are getting better down there for those guys.
Yes, hopefully, because it
Now,
was
I saw
terrible.
that down in your area, you had record heat or something this week.
I'm not sure. I mean, for
No?
us, is we're going to have a cold front, and we're going to be freezing in 57 degrees.
Crazy, crazy, crazy. Nice in the winter, but man, you pay for it in the summer in Miami. Oof, too hot for me.
Yeah.
Anyway, good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Armentrout with the Food Safety Foundation. And of course, with me is my friend Jose Sabal with Sabal Food Safety Consulting. And our emails are on here as well. And every Friday at this time at 10 Eastern, 8 Mountain, where I am, and bright and early at 7 in the morning on the Pacific, Jose and I get together and we have a chat about food safety topics. And with this, everybody, please, in the comments, we want everybody to say good morning and say hello to us. We love talking with everybody. Let us know where you're from and all that good stuff so that we can see that you're here watching this. Again, we're live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Periscope, Twitter. So we're live on all those platforms at once. And every week we'll pick a topic. And so part of this too, right, is this is not a webinar where you listen to speakers talk about something and then you ask some questions at the end and that's the end of it, right? This is a conversation. This is our thoughts around these topics and more importantly, your questions on these topics. And we'll jump in as soon as we see your questions. We like to put those right in the conversation. We're not saving this to the end. So if something pops in your head that you want us to talk about, please throw it in there. So,
Yep.
good morning to I know I'm going to mess up your name. Apologies in advance. Baja, does that look right to you, Jose? Good morning, Baja. Nice
Uh,
to see you.
yep.
And I am in Loveland, Colorado, and Jose is in
And
beautiful Florida. Morning,
Miramar,
Stuart.
Florida, very close to Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, all right. Very nice. Haven't spent a whole lot of time in that area. When I was with White Wave Foods, they have a plant up in Jacksonville, so I would go into Jacksonville quite a
Oh,
bit.
okay.
So that was always nice. And one of the things with broadcasting that you always want to do is turn your phones off, right? So I got a call. We'll let that go to voicemail. That's what's fun about live, right? There's all kinds of things happening.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. But I mean,
so
it's an open conversation, so those things are fine, I guess.
exactly. And one of the things, guys, that has become kind of a ritual here on the Food Safety Chat is we like to kind of have a moment to share together and share a drink. So Jose has his tea.
I have
And
my tea here.
I have
Yep.
my coffee. What variety of tea do you have today? Anything different?
Oh, no, same thing. Green tea.
There you go.
Yep,
And
green tea. And a little bit of lemon, concentrated lemon, and that's it.
nice. I thought you were going to say vodka, but I guess not. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And so today's topic, and so this is a cool thing here is the banners. I'm going to put that up on here. Our topic is hazard assessment. Very interesting topic.
Yes.
And really, Jose, I mean, when you talk about hazard assessment, right? So in foods and these type of things, if you're talking with FDA or things like this is really the cornerstone, right? This is what FDA really wants to understand is what do you consider hazards and how did you come to that conclusion?
Yes. Yes, that is right. This hazard assessment is actually what we do in order to determine from all the hazards that we have, which of those will cause illness or injury. That's why
Mhm.
we use our hazard assessment. So, Brian, I set up a quick introduction for this class today just to provide everyone kind of a quick overview. And in
Awesome.
my notes, I have uh, something that I'm going to focus. more on the U.S. laws and regulation, FDA regulation, and most likely USDA, because the law is the same, it's just different regulations. So when food is adulterated, and I'm using this terminology as the FDA uses this, I'm not using contamination, I'm using adulteration, is basically when the food is not matching its own specifications. Okay.
Mhm.
Uh, because of that, the food could be adulterated with filth, and that's the reason why we have GMPs in place. Or the food could be adulterated with hazards, and that's the reason why we have a hazard analysis. And the hazard analysis and our GMPs, they all are our food safety system, and
Right.
that's exactly what we are supposed to have. So this hazard analysis is part the hazard analysis is a technique that we use as part of the ISO 31010. It's just one of the many different techniques that are there. And again, the purpose is to separate things that are not hazards, that will not cause illness or injury, from those that will cause illness or injury. That's a reason for your hazard analysis.
Mm.
So, with that in mind, one of the things that I'm going to say from my auditor experience is that I saw a lot of hazard plans and hazard analysis and food safety plans and so on. Among them, I saw, and this was kind of an extreme, people saying, oh, I have a microbiological hazard and I need one control, so I'm going to be cooking. And I said, well, hold on, because if one of your microbiological hazards it's a is an organism that may cause a toxin, cooking may not be controlling.
Right.
So unless we look at each individual hazard, understand that hazard, understand the source of that hazard, which is something that I'm, continuously saying in all my classes, it's going to be very difficult for people to set up the proper controls when you identify that hazard as one that will cause illness or injury.
Right. No, very good point. I mean, part of it is yeah, you can't just have this giant bucket and say I have microhazards. And
Yeah.
FDA's next question is always going to be what? What microhazards? Right. And
Yeah,
why?
actually, that comment, Brian, it's very good because look, if I remember correctly, from appendix number 1, there is a copy of this table in appendix number 1 of the manual of the preventive control for human food, and also in page 420 of the seafood hazard manual. I'm an instructor for those two rules. So, for example, let's say that you are putting some food in a cooler because you want to make sure that you are maintaining that safety level that the product is at that point in time. And let's say that you say, okay, I want to put my cooler at 40 degrees or less. When you start trying to identify the risk of the hazard, if you say, oh, I may have microbiological hazards, one microbiological hazard is Listeria. And
Mhm.
Listeria can grow be even at 31.3, I believe is the lowest point. So these are freezing temperatures. So if you say microhazard and say I'm going to put my product in a cooler below 40, you guys are not controlling Listeria. You
Right.
are controlling E. coli, you are controlling Salmonella, but you're not controlling Listeria.
Hmm.
So saying microhazards or biological hazard as a statement, as a wide statement of hazard that will be controlling in your hazard assessment portion is not right.
Hmm.
Is not right. Now, can I say that this is that you will never ever be able to say in that column number 2 of your hazard analysis that you are going to be controlling some pathogenic bacteria? No. In some cases, that is possible. And you have a lot of experience on this, Brian, but the pasteurization of milk.
Mhm.
My goodness, you have a lot of bacteria coming from the cows in raw milk. And that is exactly the reason for the pasteurization process. Am I right?
Right. Absolutely. And part of that too, and a good point on that. And so thanks for the good morning comments, guys. Keep them coming. Is that sometimes in your assessment, you find hazards that you don't control, right? And so one of the requirements under FSMA is that when you pass that downstream, you have to let those people know. Well, and here's a good example of that. So let's say, for example, you're producing fluid milk and you have a fluid milk plant. Always in fluid milk plants, because people want skim milk and 2% milk. Those are the ones that sell the most, not whole milk. So you have excess fat, right? So you bring in the raw milk and you spin off the excess fat, and then you go through pasteurization and do all those things like you were talking about, Jose. That cream that has been taken off the milk has lots of other wonderful purposes, right? It goes to ice cream and all kinds of other things, but it hasn't been pasteurized, right? So they load it in a tanker and then they send it over to the plant, completely different operation in most cases, that's making ice cream. You have to let them know that, oh, hey, by the way, this is unpasteurized and we have not controlled for biological hazards. You have to tell them that under the regulations.
Yes, that is a requirement. Yep, that's
Mhm.
right. So look at this, Brian. I'm going to talk about the source of the hazard, which is something that I already mentioned,
Mhm.
with an example. Why it is important to know the source of a hazard.
Mhm.
So look at this. Let's say that we are a company and we are making, I don't know, chicken tenders, to say something. So we receive raw chicken, and then whatever is our process, we're going to make the chicken tenders, and they are crusted, and whatever the breading and that we put, and we fry, and we freeze, and then we sell our ready to eat cooked chicken tenders. Great. The When we go through the hazard analysis, the first thing that we're supposed to be doing is analyzing the hazards of the ingredients,
Mhm.
and then including those hazards into our flow chart. The step that we receive or that we use or whatever, those different ingredients is when we're going to be adding the hazard from the ingredients to the flow chart,
Mhm.
to the process. Okay, so look at this. When we open the door of the truck that is bringing us the raw chicken that we're going to use for our chicken tenders, we may expect to have salmonella. Of course, 100% is chicken. But guess what? The chicken facility, the slaughterhouse for the chickens, they clean everything with water. Can we expect that they need to control eventually the Listeria environment? Because it's not supposed to be there. I understand that it's a raw product. That's fine. But the typical hazard from the chicken itself is Salmonella. Listeria is an environmental hazard. And those are two sources. And those are two different things. So is it possible that you may have Salmonella, Listeria, when you're receiving raw chicken? Yes. Okay, well, and you're going to say it is supposed to be there? No. Who is the one that is actually controlling Listeria? But that's a supplier, because
Good
the
point.
supplier is supposed to have a sanitation preventive control, which could be the cleaning procedures itself, if they are controlling in a system, based on systems definition, or they may use the environmental monitoring program, and that is going to be a verification procedure from a systems standpoint.
Right. So you need to
Eh,
understand. It's a good point. Yeah. Your
Look at
supplier.
this. Let me continue a little bit with this item. Now, let's say for a second that even though that the supplier has very good cleaning procedures, and remember that chickens are controlled by FSIS, USDA, and normally the inspectors are very thorough in their inspections for the manufacturing conditions and so on. So the likelihood that we're going to have Listeria is close to I mean, very low. I'm going to say zero, but very low. Is it possible still that anyone receiving raw chicken may receive with the chicken a little bit of a Listeria? Yes, it is possible. Okay. The real control is the supplier.
Mhm.
Now, we are going to be frying the tenders once they are done. Can we say that if there is a little bit of Listeria in that product, our frying process is going to be sufficient to control Salmonella Listeria? Yes, of course. Are we concerned about shipping a product that is adulterated with Listeria? No, no, because there are actually two controls. The one that is performed by our supplier, which is a source of that hazard, the one that is performed by us when we are cooking. But look at this. Once we open the doors of that truck and we pull that raw chicken and we know that we may have, for example, Listeria and Salmonella, my point is that we're going to take that product and put it inside our own cooler. What kind of organism may grow in a refrigerated environment? Listeria?
Mhm.
Well, that is not the same Listeria that is coming in with the trucks. And one example that I'm always giving, look at this. We all, you and me and everyone, hearing this conversation, we're humans. Humans means that we are Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens is our species. Okay. But we all are different organisms. and
Mhm.
and Bryan, you are Bryan, and I'm Jose, and we have, I don't know, we have Stuart, and we have Baja, and we have Dawn, and we have Mahendra, and we have a lot of people, and we are all different. So the Listeria that is coming with the truck is a different organism than the Listeria that is living in, or potentially living in your own warehouse, in your cooler. So, what is the control for the Listeria that may happen in your cooler? Your own cleaning and sanitation procedures.
Right.
So, without finding the source of the hazard, understanding what is the source of the hazard, we will not be able to determine what is the right control.
Right, exactly. And to kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level, so to kind of summarize this, right, when you're talking with the regulatory agency, and we'll say, in this example, FSIS, to your point, right, is yes, here's our analysis. Here are the hazards that are coming into our facility from our supplier. Here are the things that we're doing with them to make sure that they're controlling those hazards on their side. That's part of our supplier program. Once it comes into our facility, it's ours. And now it's our responsibility. And here's how we maintain the good measure of the chicken, and to make sure that it's cooled and we're not encouraging growth of additional
Yeah.
contaminants. And to your point, Jose, here's how we're managing potential adulterants and things in our facility that can now contaminate that product as well. And here's how we track all of those. And downstream with our frying process, here's how that controls that hazard. Now, what FDA and USDA, FSIS, these groups ask is, how do you know, right? What is your scientific evidence that
Yep.
this temperature for your product at this at this time is effective, right? You just
Yes.
can't say, well, I've been doing this for 20 years and I know that this is okay. Nope.
Oh, no, no, no. Again, as an auditor or as an FDA investigator, agent, whatever you want to call it, I need to see the evidence.
Right.
So you're saying something. Where is the evidence? Where is the scientific evidence to support that statement?
Right. What scientific studies do you have? What epidemiological information do you have for your products? What is your target consumer audience? What is their risk associated with that? What studies have you done to show that this is effective and it gets a significant log reduction that is required for that product? All of these things, right? The evidence is super important, right? And we've been talking about micro specifically, right? But don't forget, we got micro, chemical, and physical
Chemical.
as well,
Yeah.
right? Those things need to all be addressed in this manner as well.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. So look at this. The next uh, uh, kind of a reminder I have in my list is, okay, let's now go to that assessment of the hazard,
Mm,
okay, which is in your hazard analysis, Bryan, columns number 3 and 4. Okay,
right.
column number 1 of the hazard analysis are the steps of the flow chart. So you just bring the steps, whatever steps you have in your flowchart, to that column number 1. Column number 2 are the hazards that you identify for each of those steps. And then column number 3 and 4 is, okay, fine. What about the severity? What about the likelihood of this hazard, and how you can justify if the hazard is going to cause illness or injury or not?
Right.
And that is called an assessment. That is the hazard assessment portion of your hazard analysis. So for that, Brian, there is not a big deal. I believe that everybody in this chat knows exactly that this is based on severity and likelihood. I mean,
Mhm.
no mystery here. But there are a few things that I would like to explain. And the first one, let's talk about severity. So severity is linked to the hazard. Okay, for example, if you say norovirus, the severity is that, for example, most likely, most of the cases of anyone getting norovirus, yeah, people are going to feel bad, people are going to vomit, and it's an illness by definition, and that is prohibited by law to happen. But the likelihood that someone is going to die from that is, I mean, very, very, very low. It's just illness. Eventually, if someone dehydrates, may go to a hospital to get hydrated, but the really likelihood of dying is very, very low. Now,
Mhm.
if I say instead of that, no, my hazard is not hepatitis A, the hazard I'm concerned of is listeria, and then you go and read uh, uh, what are the consequences, what is the severity for listeria, and you may find out that 3 out of 10 people are going to die.
Mhm.
So those two hazards are totally different in severity, and that severity is linked to that hazard. So look
Right.
at this. The definition of a hazard that is going to cause illness or injury is defined as the hazard analysis defines a hazard that will cause illness or injury as a biological, chemical, or physical hazard that has the potential to cause illness or injury in the absence of controls. That is
Yes.
the key point in that definition, because
Hmm.
it's in the absence of controls. Now, many people do not pay very good attention to this portion of the definition, because this portion somehow is linked to the GNPs. GNPs by default are procedures that we have in place to most likely clean filth. But in some cases, that filth could also pose a potential microbiological, physical, or chemical hazard. So it
Yeah.
is possible that we have some controls that somehow are reducing the likelihood of that hazard to happen.
Yep. And I want to bring up an important point here too, Jose, is that as you're doing your hazard analysis and figuring out what is reasonable from a severity and likelihood standpoint for your target audience, right? If you are selling to general population, okay, right? That's, you need to look at that way. If you are selling to nursing homes, you need to look at it differently. If you're selling to children,
Oh,
you need to look at it differently. If you're manufacturing a product that is marketed to children, and you have in your food safety plan that your target audience is general population, your hazard assessment is going to be wrong,
yep,
and FDA is going to challenge you
exactly
on it,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Because children
very,
have different
very
needs.
good point.
Yes. See, we
Excellent
got,
point.
yeah, and that's something. It's a personal thing for me that when I go in and look at food safety plans, I push on that hard, because Jose, you've seen as many as I have, and every single food safety plan that I look at says, "What is your target audience?" It says general population,
Yep,
and I'm like, really, really?
yep,
There's a billboard outside your plant with a picture of children eating product on it.
yeah,
General population, really?
yep,
And they
yep.
go, well, yeah, okay. You need to look at that. You can't ignore it. So let's
And
see. Let's see what's Neil saying here. By the way, Neil, thanks. Good seeing you. If not maintaining equipment, your critical control program equipment, it negates your program. PM programs need more emphasis in the audit. Are they competing, and have they analyzed for proper timing of PMs? Good point, right?
I agree with that 100%.
Yes, if you aren't PMing your pasteurizer and you have little pinholes in your plates, worthless.
Well, that's a very good point in your specifically for the pasteurization of liquids. But look at this, Bryan. Neil is so, and I'm going to say hi, Neil. First, we exchanged a few emails some time ago. So you have a so wonderful point there, because in systems, and again, I'm going to the 30,000 feet view. In systems, we have control procedures and we have verifications of the control procedures. So anything that it's a control is going to be preventing a hazard. In this case, we're talking about hazards. Going to be preventing the hazard. It's going to be eliminating the hazard. Is going to be reducing that hazard to an acceptable level or maintaining that acceptable level. That's a control by definition. Those are the things that controls will do. So if you grab a metal detector is actually a verification of a control. You are verifying that the food do not contain metal with a metal detector. But look at the definition of food. Is something that is going to be used for food or drink for men or other animals. So metal is not food. And if you go to the regulation, and it makes sense, you cannot have metal in food. As soon as you have metal in food, the product is already adulterated with or without the metal detector. So the metal detector by default is a verification of a control. And which are the typical controls when you're talking about metal? Well, of course, your PMs and the frequency that you perform your PMs and the inspections of the equipments and tools and utensils in your process. That is the real control. So you have a very good point there, Neil.
Yes, he does. And part of that then too, right, is understanding, to your point, right, adulteration within the product, right? And then there's also on the physical hazards, what is an actual physical threat, right? What particle size? Because part of this as well is metal detectors have limits on what they can detect, right? For ferrous, non-ferrous, and those type of different metals that are in your facility. It's all also dependent upon the aperture size. So if you have a small product in that aperture that it's going through, that metal detector is going to be very, very sensitive. It's going to be able to pick things up easier. If you're running 50-pound bags of non-fat dry milk through a giant metal detector aperture, it's not going to be as sensitive. It's going to let things through. So you need to understand that in the assessment as well. That's a very good point, Neil. Thank you.
Yep.
Let's see what Raphael has a point here as well. So Raphael, we always like to see you here as well. So Listeria, Salmonella, I thought Jose was going to say, quote, supplier may not bring any risk, and downstream, the hazard contamination may be completely controlled. But maybe the driver went to the bathroom just before unloading the truck, washed hands, and not disinfected, right? And didn't follow proper procedures. And there was Listeria and stuff on the door handle that created contamination. Obviously, a movie description is I would never be able to trace, right? I wash my hands with hot water and everything else, right? Yeah, I mean, that can definitely happen. Good procedures, good training, right? That's.
And you know what? I'm going to add to Raphael's comment one thing that it is what I do, and I'm going to share this with all of you guys. If you take the seafood hazard training, there is a section in that class when the FDA says that we trainers are supposed to explain the difference between the traditional hazard analysis approach and the all-inclusive hazard analysis approach. And the FDA says that the FDA suggests that we use the all-inclusive. So why? And I'm going to illustrate this with actually with milk. I saw it. I saw this perfect example in a milk facility. So you have raw milk, and you know that there are a lot of different pathogens there. So once milk facilities test for antibiotics, and okay, so no antibiotic here, you can unload the truck. What is going to be done? In the traditional hazard analysis, someone is going to say, well, we have E. coli and we have cryptosporidium and we have this and this and this in raw milk. And you list all the pathogens in raw milk.
Mhm.
And those pathogens are going to be transferred to the receiving step of your flow chart. Okay, you are receiving the milk. So in
Mhm.
the traditional approach, you are going to say, okay, so all of these guys don't care. I'm going to have um, a critical control point at the pasteurization process, pasteurization step, and that's it. And you group all of those hazards into one pathogenic group of hazards. Control that in your pasteurization step, and you will never see those hazards again after pasteurization. But the reality is that as soon as the milk is approved to be unloaded from the truck, you're going to have a guy that is going to grab a huge hose, connect that to the back of the truck, connect the other end to the pump, and then start pumping from the truck to the raw milk tank. Well, now all of those hazards that we identified in the raw milk are now touching the pump, the pipes, the hoses, the potentially the hands of those individuals handling those products. And we need to have GMPs in place frequent enough to maintain those equipment, pipes, and tools and utensils clean.
Yep.
So
That's
using that approach will always give you a uh, the maintenance of those sanitary conditions as required by the regulation. That's a very good point, Rafael.
definitely. And I think part of this too, this brings home something that I think we bring up every single time we have this talk, Jose. We bring this up, all right? And this is popping into my mind right now, is these systems do not stand alone, right? These are all,
Oh no,
it's all integrated. You just can't rely on one, right? So you have to have the GMPs, you have to have the cleaning, the sanitation, the PM, all of these things. If they don't work, it's all for nothing, right? It's like Brandon makes a point here. Sanitary design. Oh my goodness, sanitary design.
no, yeah,
How many
no
times?
questions,
Yeah, I'll
no
walk into a
questions
plant.
about that. Critical.
Yeah, I'll walk into one of my plants and we'll go walk the floor and I'll say, well, what's that? Oh yeah, engineering bought a new piece of equipment. They got a great deal on it, right? Then I start looking at it and I say, oh, I see why they got a great deal. How do we clean this? And they go, don't know, right? Sanitary design control, super important, right? Don't let
Yep.
them do that, right? Your food safety plan is the stop point, right? Nothing changes in the plant from a food safety standpoint until the food safety team has gone through that and make sure that it doesn't introduce new hazards to the process. So Alan has a point here as well. So hi, Alan. Nice seeing you, my friend. Bryan and Jose, what changes when your customer is a processor? For example, if you are making an ingredient or a low acid product that's further processed by a downstream customer, is the pH a CCP for the upstream manufacturer? Well, I mean, so you're making ingredients and then selling them to somebody else.
It depends. And you gave the answer before, Brian, because you said what is the intended use and what is the consumers of those products. That's what I need to read. At
Yeah.
that point, oh, is the product ready to eat and it's supposed to be eaten by anyone, even if it's an ingredient? You're done. Because at that point, everything that is ready to eat applies to your product, even if it's an ingredient.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So I was part of GMA, which is now what CBA, I believe they are, the Grocery Manufacturers Association. I was part of the team that presented to FDA on foreign supplier verification, and I was speaking to them about risk, and that you reminded me of that. And one of the points I made to FDA was, hey, listen, guys, let's pretend that we have a 50-pound bag of non-fat dry milk. The risk is not necessarily inherent in that product; it's intended use that determines hazards. And they kind of looked at me like this. And I'm like, if that bag of non-fat dry milk goes to a pet food manufacturer, different
Yeah.
risk than if that same bag of non-fat dry milk went to an infant formula manufacturer. I'm going to be looking at different risks. Same bag, you have to understand the context within the manufacturing application.
And that's why in the specifications of our products, we are supposed to have the intended use and the consumers of the products.
Yep, absolutely. Um, So Neil had a follow up here. Can you do a session on sanitation preventive controls? Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
That,
yeah.
yeah, we
I
can do
would
that.
love
And
to do that one.
oh yeah, and so thank you guys. So please, as Neil's doing here, we love that, right? This is for you. We're here to get together and talk about these things. This isn't just us, right? This is you. So please, as you have suggestions, you see our emails here. So please, if you don't put it in the comments, send us an email, and we'll take a look at it and possibly do a show on it. So Jose, one of the questions I get a lot is, okay, we've been talking about, we're looking at our hazards, we're going through in physical, chemical, microbiological, all these things, and we need proof. And people say, oh, okay, I need to find some proof as I'm doing this and documenting that. What do you guys recommend? What type of source material should I be using as the evidence that of that risk?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say, Brian, that as a general statement, we're supposed to have the specifications of all of the ingredients that we are receiving, and actually, this is one of the very, I'm going to say, very difficult things. Not difficult, challenging. Why? Because you may say, look at this example. So I was helping a client of mine to develop a food safety plan according to the preventive control for human food. And they are importing a lot of different products. And I'm going to say that one of the products that they import is from another country that the maximum amount of aflatoxins that can be present in order to be consumed for humans based on the regulation in that country is 30 parts per million. Now, in the United States, is 20 parts per million. You can export from the US to that country. You cannot export to that country to the US and assume that the product is fine because the limits are different. So
Right.
again, it's about knowing what is acceptable and what is not, and knowing which are the different components that a product specification should have, like the intended use and the consumers. My God.
Wait, definitely. So Catherine had a question here for us. What would you suggest when you don't get clear insights to use? Non-fat dry milk often can go through brokers or distributors. How would you suggest handling? Well, the good news on that is that when FSMA first started, brokers and those guys were like, this doesn't involve us. And we're like, oh yeah, it does. Because originally, brokers and other distributors were very secretive as to their sources. It's like, okay,
Yes.
my purchasing department would say, I need non-fat dry milk. And they would go to a broker, and the broker would say, okay, I can get it to you for this price. And then the broker go out and source it and send it. It could come from anywhere, right? And with FSMA, it's like, no, unacceptable. We need to know exactly where it's coming from. We need to know the plant, and we need documentation either from you, broker, or from that actual plant. Oh, and guess what, broker? You can only sell us products from the plants we have approved. Period.
Yeah. And you know what, Brian? You said that so nicely that I'm just going to add the definition of a supplier by the FDA is anyone that is manufacturing or processing the food. And watch out, because the FDA has a definition for manufacturing processing, and the statement in the Word document is like this big. So there are many, many different activities that will be there. So that's one supplier. The second one is the one that raises animals, is a supplier. And then the third one is the one that grows the crops that are going to be used for food for humans or animals. Okay, that is the definition of a supplier. That's it. So
And here's
brokers
something
are
that,
not defined as suppliers.
yeah, here's something that trips people up too. Oh, I'm getting in-process materials from my sister plant. That's a supplier.
It's a supplier by
Just because
definition.
it's your same company, nope, that's a supplier.
Nope. Sister plant or not, you will need to go through the hazard analysis exactly the same way.
Yep, absolutely. Now, on the reference material, some of the things that I use when I'm helping people develop plans, and I document all this in food safety plans, and the template I use with my clients is really helpful things that FDA is using, right? Because one of my rules is, and I'm sure you follow this too, Jose, is always use information from FDA or FSIS or whoever it is that you can, because that's their information, right? You're on the same page. So you're talking the same language with FDA, right? So for a long, long time, and this is still a good source, is FDA's bad bug book, right, that goes through and lists the different organisms and the epidemiological information and where you typically find it and these type of things, right? It comes from FDA. If they're going in to audit your program, they're not going to challenge their own information, right? So you need to use that. Something else that's very helpful that FDA recently came out with, and it's a guidance document, but FDA is using it a lot, and everybody on this call should be using this too if you're under FSMA, is Appendix 1, right? FDA's guidance document called Appendix 1. So FDA went through and gave their best guess for chemical, physical, and microbiological for just a huge list of different materials. So chocolate, Salmonella, Listeria, right? And it goes through that. So chocolate, we'll keep on that example, right? Heavy metals. Maybe there's heavy metal risk with chocolate you need to be considering. You can use that source material. And conversely, if it's in that guidance document and you don't address it, guess what? FDA is going to have a lot of questions for you. A lot of questions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep. So look at this. And let me finish with our original topic. So when I was talking about all of these hazards and the risk assessment and so on, the severity, which is my point here, never changes. Once you say that Listeria is going to kill 3 out of 10 people, once you say that, for example, norovirus is going to make someone very sick, eventually someone may need to go to a hospital for hydration, but the likelihood that someone is going to die is extremely low. That's it. That hazard, that severity is linked to that hazard with or without controls. So my point is that if your risk depends on severity and likelihood, and severity never changes, how do you lower risk? The only chance that you have is to lower the likelihood. How do you lower the likelihood? By setting up control procedures as defining systems.
Right. Our whole
That's
goal.
the trick here.
That is a beautiful point. I love that. So for everybody on this live stream in this chat, if you pick up only one thing from what we've been talking about is what Jose just said, because that was brilliant, my friend. That was very well said.
So the only way that you can reduce that risk is by setting up not just controls, like I said, setting up controls that are effective. And that word effective means that once you wrote your control procedure, you must validate that control procedure. And that validation goes back to what you mentioned before, Bryan. It's not just, for example, saying, oh, the milk must be pasteurized to 161 or more for, I don't know, 36 seconds, 15 seconds. What was the number, Bryan? Something like that. Is that right?
On the viscosity and the turbulence and all kinds of different things. Yeah.
Well, okay, but let's say that I'm going to use those 2 variables, and you're going to say, fine, those numbers are the numbers given to you by the regulation. My question as your auditor, being an SQF, FSSC auditor, or being an FDA agent, I'm going to say, okay, prove me that your equipment is capable of achieving those numbers that you are saying.
Right.
At that point, you are validating your control. At that point, you are reducing the likelihood. And indeed, because of that, you are reducing the risk.
Yep. Validation. Can it do what I'm saying it can do? Verification, it's doing it.
Yep. Have you done that exactly as written with the same frequency? Yes or no? Yep.
Exactly.
So, many people will use the multiplication, a matrix that multiplies the whatever are the values for severity with the values for likelihood, and then okay, I have catastrophic and critical and whatever for severity, and very likely and likely and unlikely and medium likely and so on, and I have 1 2 3 4 5 and 1 2 3 4 5, so 5 times 5 is 25, and then you put 25 in your matrix, and that's it. And watch out, guys, because you might be getting into real trouble if you do this, because you may find the same risk number by doing that from a hazard like norovirus, because norovirus is going to be low in severity, but very likely. if you have Listeria for that same product, may not be that likely, but it's going to be highest in severity. And it is possible that you may get the same number, but the hazards are totally different because the severity is different.
Yep.
And in
Very,
a
very.
regular basis, multiplying those numbers in a matrix is not the right approach.
Yep. Yep. You have to be careful with that. Absolutely. And you have to
You,
explain this, right? So to your point, when the auditor comes in, or FDA or FSIS or whoever shows up, you have to be able to explain all of this to them
yes.
on why you did this and why you chose this and what evidence you had to prove that this was correct. Here's another quick example, and this kind of ties in what Neil was asking about with sanitation. Is okay, so you're in a facility that has allergens, and you're crossing, you're changing from one allergen to another. So you have programs in place for sanitation, and to verify that you're cleaning the allergens, you're using swabs or something, right? And you're testing to make sure there's no allergens.
Yep.
But you just can't do that, right? You have to validate that your cleaning works and that the swabs are effective at finding it, right? Because if you just buy a test kit off the shelf and go, I'll just test everything else, it may not work with your product. You
Yep.
need to do that backup work, because as auditors, right, that's something that we're going to push on, right? And we go in, we're going to ask that. How do you know? Well, the people that sold it to me said it's good. Nope.
Nope. Yep.
And
And you know what? It's quite unique, Bryan, is that in systems, okay, when you talk about the ways that you're going to be verifying your controls, one of the verification options is the validation. So validation by default is a verification activity. You are verifying that the control is effective. And every time that we said effective, and that every time that we talk about validation, you know what we're talking about, right? We're talking about principle number 3 of the hazard analysis. You need to set up some criteria that is going to say this is fine and this is not fine. That's your validation.
Yeah. Man, it's a lot to take in, right? And so you can imagine, right, if you're a quality manager sitting in a plant going, right, it's a lot to cover, right? There's a lot to consider. And that's why this is so important, right? This is the cornerstone. This is everything. This is at the center of the universe for how you're managing food safety, right? So you need to really, really have this locked down. And earlier, as we were talking about, Jose, you just can't say, what proof do you have? I just know, I've been doing this a long time. Nope. Man, that's a recipe for a 483 right there, right? Out comes the pen. FDA will not like that answer at all.
Or a warning letter, depending on the hazard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let's see. We'll kind of see if anybody's got any more questions here. Well, if anybody's got anything else here before we go off the air, we're happy to do that. We try and keep these around 45, 50 minutes. And it's amazing. Once again, Jose, time's gone. It's like, man, it seems like we just got started.
Yes.
So let's bring this back to the 30,000 foot level for people. Go ahead.
Okay. So look at this. The last point that I have in my notes is that lately we have seen a lot of HACCP, and then VACCP, and then TACCP, and all of these acronyms and whatever. And you're going to say, hey, hold on. What's going on here? Vulnerability assessment and critical control points, and threat assessment and critical control points. Well, guys, don't get too, confused. Same 7 principles for you. Okay. The only thing is that for the VACCP and for the TACCP, what is new in those two is that those are being used for food fraud or for food defense. Mm-hmm. And in those two cases, the hazards are not going to be accidental, are intentional. Because of that, both, I don't care if it's a VACP or the TACP, both, you need to analyze how vulnerable is the company and your processes to have that risk. And that vulnerability is linked to the detection variable. So now your risk assessment is not going to rely only on the severity and the likelihood, but you guys need to somehow try to identify the ability that you have to detect that concern, that hazard, that situation, and then what you can do to mitigate that condition.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. So I think, and thank you for bringing that up because I'd forgotten it. And really, I think when people ask me about VACCP and TACCP, right, I get the question of, okay, well, hold on, Jose, isn't this just like you were talking about food defense and intentional adulteration? Aren't they saying the same thing?
Yeah.
Yes, but these programs are bigger, right? It's more involved, more information.
But the assessment of the potential vulnerabilities for food fraud and the potential vulnerabilities for intentional adulteration threats is the same. It's going to be using the 7 principles. So
Yep.
the hazard assessment or the vulnerability assessment or the threat assessment are the same steps. You
Yep.
go through your flowchart, you identify which are the steps in your process or the areas that might be affected, which is now linked a little bit more with FISMA in a wider approach on where you can set up control measures. Okay.
Mhm.
And then try to identify hazards in a hazard plan or vulnerability in your food fraud plan or threats in your food defense plan, and then try to determine based on a risk assessment, which is exactly what we're talking today, the topic for today, which of those are going to need a control measure, or a vulnerability, or a mitigation measure, which is the same name for food fraud and for food defense, in order to reduce the likelihood of those hazards to an acceptable level, because at the end it's the same.
Yep, absolutely. Good discussion. Hey, I'm going to throw
we
a
went
link.
deep.
Let's see if we can do this. I haven't tried this before, but I mentioned Appendix 1, right, which has the physical, chemical, and microbiological threats as FDA is viewing them. But again, this is guidance, right? FDA isn't saying this is the law. This is just FDA's guess, right? So I'm going to see if I can put this link in here. I think I can. Yeah, look at that. So there's the link to that actual document, guys. If you want that, there it is right there for you. So as usual, great discussion. If you think of questions afterwards that you want to ask us, of course, here's our emails. We're more than happy, and we always get questions after this. And sometimes we'll go back and check the feed in the live streams, and we'll see other questions that show up in here. But sometimes we don't. So I think really, emailing us is probably the best way to get hold of us if you have additional questions.
It is, yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Well, thank you again, everybody. Have a great Friday. I'm going to try and type without making a mistake. There we go. So,
yeah, me
again,
too. I'm
awesome
going to leave some,
and, Great. All right. Well, we'll sign off now, and thanks, everybody. We really appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and Jose, enjoy yours as well.
Thank you very much. Good weekend to everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And